said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
You know that dumb old rhyme about sugar and spice versus snakes and snails? Well, apparently, feminists are made of broken records. Feminist promulgation on labor usually relies on the demonstrably false presumption of feminist responsibility for women's entry into the workplace. That, in turn, relies on ignoring women's pre-World War II labor, as well as the conditions which, during the war, led to women temporarily filling some work areas that were previously dominated by men. Not only have women always worked, when they so chose, and backed that choice with initiative, accountability, and passion like men do, women have created their own jobs, run businesses, built and controlled great wealth, and left lasting legacies. They were involved in the industry that transformed the American labor force from being mainly family labor and apprenticeship to wage labor, the textile industry. They were also involved in areas we now think of as traditionally male. The divide wasn't between male workers and female, but between manual labor or working class employees and the professional class. Only when women themselves complained about facing the same working conditions as men did anyone step in to create change. An account from Great Britain Parliamentary Papers 1842, Volume 16, shows that at least one politician, an upper-class position, investigating because of such complaints, was appalled to see working-class Welsh girls and women facing the same conditions as men in English coal mines. Further down that page, a woman describes the work and goes on to state that it was even harder to do while pregnant, or in a family way, as she put it. This is by far not the only example. Because their population spread out into multiple nations and interacted with multiple cultures, Jewish history is also an interesting source of information on historical patterns of women's labor and professional careers. The Jewish Women's Archive points out in their article on entrepreneurs that there are records of female property owners as early as the 5th century BCE, and they provide examples. The article further points out that within the body of Jewish civil and ceremonial law and legend, referencing both the Mishnah and the Talmud, writing reflecting Jewish lifestyles from the 1st century CE to the 6th century CE assumed that most women worked. It goes on to describe the phenomenon of women working in several of the various cultures within which Jews have lived, from the perspective of Jewish historians. The writing shows that while the female side of the legal division of financial responsibility in the home differed from today, the phenomenon of women working, earning incomes, and using them for various purposes has existed worldwide for centuries. Women's sex didn't stop them from working, society didn't arbitrarily stop them on its basis, and feminism has never been needed to provide women with a pathway into the labor force or the professional world. Women's work isn't about liberating ourselves from some phenomenon of dastardly or careless male oppression. Women have always had the same reasons for working that men do. This can be anything from our family's need of our income, as is truer in the lower or middle income families, to passion for a particular field, a sense of community responsibility, or having been raised, as boys generally are, to see work as a fulfillment of our life's purpose. As with many men, many women pursue their careers to earn wealth or prestige, or to leave their mark on the world. These are manifestations of strength, ingenuity, aspiration, and accountability. And feminism stains the legacy of women working throughout history with the narrative that women were somehow trapped in the homemaker role until their savior, Rosie the Riveter, came along. That narrative could not be further from the truth. Lower-income women weren't choosy about which jobs they took because they were poor and couldn't afford to be choosy. Upper-class women didn't seek out jobs in coal mines and textile mills, take positions serving other households, or otherwise subject themselves to harsh labor. They stayed at home because they could, or they engaged in activism, wrote or sought education, earned credentials, and took higher-end, higher-paying, more prestigious, or more interesting jobs. Rosie the Riveter wasn't about freeing women from anything. She was about women stepping up to fill jobs vacated by men who were drafted or volunteered to fight in the war. The effort was not so much a feminist initiative to change women's roles as it was a social response to suddenly changing labor needs. And it occurred because of something completely unrelated to feminism, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which dramatically altered the dynamics of the labor market. The law established a 44-hour work week, later shortened to the 40 hours we know today, and outlawed oppressive child labor practices. The need for large numbers of women to enter the manufacturing labor force was in part created by the shorter work week, which increased the number of people it would take to produce the same results, and in part by the removal of children from the workforce, which left women as the default replacement for those men who went off to war. Outlawing child labor, though a needed and obviously right step for the U.S. government to take, was not a response to feminism. Support for the movement to end child exploitation in the workforce was partly due to concern for children's welfare, and partly a result of the shrunken Depression-era job market and pressure to reserve jobs for households supporting adults. Unless feminism caused the stock market crash of 1929, which led to that pressure, and started the war which pulled men from factories in the early 40s, feminists can't really claim credit for even that expansion of women's roles in the workplace, rosy or not. To justify such false claims of credit for women's ability to make independent career choices, we now face a very public, vehement demand that women be viewed by society as dependent on feminism. It makes it almost an exercise in irony to remember that the first printed copies of America's Declaration of Independence were published by respected Revolutionary War printer and postmistress Mary Catherine Goddard, as is explained in the article Enterprising Women, 250 Years of American Business, published by Harvard University's Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. What is the basis for feminism's lies about women's work history? They engage in cherry-picking, using a data set that excludes the working majority to focus only on women who have had the option to not work. They discuss the natural results of women's individual choices as if their causes are entirely external or worse, imposed on them by the men around them. They treat gender differences in professional and job-seeking choices as if women do not determine their own interests and that determination is never based on their own aptitudes and their desire to build on or shape them. Instead, they presume women's interests and aptitudes entirely subject to manipulation by social pressures and the demands of their families. They treat women's choice of professional pursuits or job entry, their interest in work-life balance, and their resulting career paths as if the woman involved were shuffled into place against her will by these pressures. In short, they completely ignore women's agency while inflating men's agency to account for any choice a woman makes that is not feminist approved. Because of this, when a family has a single income earner who makes enough money to unilaterally financially support the household, if that earner is not the wife and the couple chooses to be a single breadwinner couple, feminists see the wife as a victim, even when the choice was mostly or solely hers to make. They do not consider the husband a victim of anything should the wife choose to rely on him financially instead of working, even if he would rather not be the only breadwinner of their household, and in fact, even if she's kicked him out of it. Men are routinely ordered following divorce or the birth of a child out of wedlock to accept employment, to not be picky about said employment, and even to earn stipulated amounts of pay from such employment or face jail time, all based on a mandate that they make payments to mothers who more often than not have chosen to raise their children without the father in the home. Feminist complaints that prioritizing work-life balance over value provided to the employer shouldn't lead to adverse results for the employee when women do it vanish when the worker in question is a man with a child support or alimony obligation. She has rights. He has responsibilities. Feminists excuse their victim narrative by using that agency shuffle, usually combined with ignoring the sight of any particular imbalance where men are adversely affected. You know the list. Jobs involving dangerous, difficult, dirty, or distressing work, the expectation that they work longer hours, be more flexible in their availability, including willingness to work nights and weekends, or that they take less time off and perform the heavier, more laborious, dangerous, dirty, or distressing parts of any job at which they have female coworkers. Men are also uniquely expected to accommodate the sensibilities of their coworkers of the opposite sex. The accountability gap here is not subtle, but a wide chasm that all too often swallows men whole, not because employers are uniquely unfair, but because the workplace is not exempt from exhibiting higher expectations and greater demands which are placed on men in every aspect of society. Are dynamics like work-life balance, work environment, and fair compensation issues that merit a discussion among the general public? Certainly. Is there potential for reform? Quite likely, yes. Are these gendered issues? Well, maybe, but certainly not in the way that feminists would have you believe. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 26, the never-ending sob story, accountability gap in the workplace. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to deconstruct yet another feminist strawman. But before we get into today's topic, a couple of reminders. If you want to join the chat on YouTube, please go to the Badger Livestreams channel. If YouTube is experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, or you're just sick of the site's political shenanigans, we're also on Twitch and Facebook. If you want to be sure you'll always be able to catch our live streams, even if YouTube decides to throw us in the gulag for wrongthink, or if you want to catch our show in its audio format, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and remember to register to receive notifications. And also, we do have a fundraiser up to get our witnesses back to the courtroom for one more round against our opponent's fancy schmancy New York lawyer. If you want to help us fight that battle, you can find the fundraiser at feedthebadger.com as the featured project. And we're about 2/3 of the way there, so thank you very much, everybody that's donated. And thank you very much for listening. So for the past few weeks, we've been going over some of the Women's March talking points. Today we're covering their hot take on labor, titled Workers' Rights. As you heard in the opening monologue, feminism was never needed to create a pathway for women into the workplace. So what then are they trying to sell us with this concept of workers' rights as a women's issue? Well, let's look at their official talking point. They've titled it Workers' Rights, and they say, "We believe in an economy powered by transparency, accountability, security, and equity. All women should be paid equitably." All women, right? Not all workers, but all women, with access to affordable childcare, sick days, health care, paid family leave, and healthy work environments. All workers, including domestic and farm workers, undocumented and migrant workers, must have the right to organize, by which they mean unionize, and fight for a living minimum wage. So, what are they really saying here?
They're saying we only care about half of people. Yay! Because heaven forbid, like a single guy like my dad be able to go to work and have affordable childcare and everything else that he needs to support his family. You know, it doesn't matter. It's all about the women. Only the women matter. Work is a woman's issue. Apparently everything in the entire world is a woman's issue. I'm sure my bed sheets are a women's issue if we look at it the right way.
Well, that we could do a whole show on that. But yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm seeing in it too. I see it as this talking point as the idea that women should be uniquely exempt from the expectations traditionally placed on employees in a business relationship that has existed between employer and employee since the dawn of paid employment. You work for the paycheck. The employer's not responsible for your home life, your life choices, your work-life balance, and all of that stuff. That is all. If your employer recognizes the value of accommodating your work-life balance, that's good, but to mandate it is not, you know.
No, not at all. It's completely ridiculous. And just as a side note, one thing that it really gets my goat is whenever people are talking about women deserve the same pay for the same work, they're often looking at it at such a ridiculous surface level. They'll say, okay, this guy does the exact same job as I do, so we should get the same amount, without paying attention to the fact that maybe he has 8 more years of experience, maybe he has a more relevant degree, maybe he has a more extensive work history before this job that has given him more experience that makes him worth more to the employer of this position. Like, there are so many different things. It's not just a men against women thing. I would feel exactly the same way if it was a woman that had more seniority and more experience. It's not a gender thing, and the fact that they keep focusing on it like this is the main issue is just shows how shallow they're looking at this situation.
Yeah, I remember some things from, I've worked at a lot of different jobs. I've done a lot of different things because I'm one of those people, I don't do one job. It's very rare for me to only have one job at a time. And so I've done photography, I've worked for newspapers, I've worked for university information technology agency, not agencies, but departments. I've done nursing home work, I've worked as a nurse's aide, I'm a direct caregiver now, I've worked in retail, and I've been in a lot of different environments. I mean, there are stories from every place that I've worked. I could tell you stories of tasks within the jobs that are basically reserved for the guys. But probably the most starkly unfair thing I ever encountered wasn't something that happened at my workplace. When I was in college, I dated a house tech that worked at the hospital, oddly enough, where I was born. And one night there was a shooting in that community where the guy he'd been hit in the throat, and they couldn't save him. They worked really hard to try to save him, but it was a situation where you just couldn't stop the bleeding. They did everything they could, and they couldn't stop the blood loss. And it was a gang execution. It wasn't a random shooting or a robbery or something like that. It was a targeted act of violence. But his family blamed the hospital, made it a racial issue, and all of a sudden, all of his fellow gang members, his family members, people in his community that were protest-oriented, basically, that they would show up anytime there was any kind of conflict at all, and then people in the greater community, the larger area, that would show up for protests that were like that the whole parking lot ended up filled. So the guy comes home, and he tells me what he's allowed to tell me, and I ended up learning the rest from the newspaper, that the rest of the details of the incident, that it was an execution, and that the shot was in the throat, and that the bleeding couldn't be stopped, and all the stuff that was published. But what he explained to me was that he'd been placed in a doorway, and he's lit from behind, and he's looking out, and everybody's dressed in black, and everybody's got, they're carrying stuff, they're carrying things to throw or things to hit people with, and he's looking out into this parking lot. All of the men in the facility that worked in that facility were drafted into security detail that night to prevent the hospital from being stormed by angry protesters. And none of the women, obviously, were in that position, just the men. But I will bet you that there would be women who would complain if any of the guys got higher pay, even for just that night, if they got a bonus for just that night and the women didn't.
Yeah, no kidding.
And no, I got people asking in the chat, were they armed at least? No, they were not. They were not armed. Yeah. I mean, you were not allowed to carry a weapon into your workplace in most workplaces, unless you work armed security, and then you have to have licensing, and your weapon has to be a specific weapon, usually either provided by your security company, or you have to have approval for that being the weapon that you're using, or unless you're a cop, and again, it's police issue weapon, not your own normally. In fact, if I understand correctly, it's pretty much universal. Cops are not allowed to carry their own guns. They have to carry a department-issued gun. And then that's for traceability. So it's one of those things. This was, you know, like I've seen a lot of different things when I worked in retail. Anytime there was heavy lifting, the guy got called to do it. You know, when I worked in the nursing homes, anytime there was a male nurse's aide available, he got called to help with all of the heavy lifting.
Or the disgusting jobs, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, like, when there wasn't a guy available, I was the one that got called for that stuff, because I'm 5'9", and I have broad shoulders, and I don't get disgusted by, you know, bodily fluids and stuff like that. You can't really gross me out by presenting me something to clean up like that, as long as I have the proper equipment. So that's where I kind of got an idea of what it's like. But yeah, it's just, and that's never taken into consideration when we talk about the wage gap. That kind of thing is never taken into consideration. Things like the difference between working day shift and night shift. And a lot of people think of it as, you know, an inconvenience, big deal. I worked a night shift at the gas station down the street from where I live. And I worked there for 6 years. I worked in different positions in there. I was chief cook and bottle washer in their little kitchen for a while. And, you know, I'd go in there, I'd get to work at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark outside. And I had a coworker. I came in one morning, and 15 minutes earlier, he had been pistol whipped and robbed at gunpoint. And, you know, I'd like, there were 2 times during that 6 years when I worked there. There were 2 times that somebody brought in a gun and robbed the place. And there were 2 times that somebody brought in a knife and robbed the place. And the time that people got the most outraged was actually one of the knife incidents, because the night shifter was a pregnant woman. They got outraged over the guy just holding it in his hand, right? He didn't, like, stab it at her or anything, just scared the living daylights out of her.
Yeah.
And I worked that night shift for a while. That does deserve a shift differential. I mean, you're taking a risk that doesn't take place during the day.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
when there weren't women, you know, working the night shift, when it was guys working the night shift, feminists would look at it as that shift differential is sexist, because the women are working during the day and the guys are earning more money.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, you know, you want to take karate and go work the night shift yourself, go for it. That's what feminism is all about, right? Empowering women. Go empower yourselves. Do what the men want to do. There you go. You can do it too. That's what Rosie the Riveter said. You can do it. It's not that hard. And if, you know what, if only women had taken these jobs, then the men could be the ones to stay at home with the children just like they want, right? Except no, because then they'd complain about, where have all the good men gone? You've got yourself a lazy husband who doesn't want to do any work. Why are you supporting that lazy man that doesn't want to do anything? It seems to me that men can't really win either way.
Yeah, I'm gonna because we've got a couple of them already. I'm gonna read a few super chats we have here. We got 2. 3 of them actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so French Honey Badger gave us $20. This one was relevant to the opening monologue. He says, child labor laws did not end child labor, and he is right about that. It still happened. But there are. What the child labor laws did was they dramatically altered what children could be made to do and at what age. But in any case, he says it only prevented teenagers from working, which satisfied the unions. The job pressure in the Great Depression was created by the state. They fixed wages and prevented layoffs. And yep, that is all true. There was also the issue, however, of the reduced number of jobs. And there was definitely pressure from the labor movement to set it up so that employers, see, you could pay children less. You could pay children less. You could pay minorities less. You could pay women less. So if you hired a white guy who was expected to be the breadwinner of his household, you were paying a premium for that guy coming in and working. And if the job market had been allowed to correct itself without government interference, probably a lot of that would have changed over time. As education became more available, people would not have wanted their children to be in the workplace, and so there would have been, you know, more people saying, well, I'm not going to send my child out to work, I will go out and take this job. And there would have been more people saying, if my kid's going to work, he's going to get paid like an adult, you know. So it would have been, there may have been some need for government regulation, but I don't think it would have been the way that it was. However, it still stands that feminists didn't achieve this. This wasn't something that happened because feminists came in and said, you're not allowing women to work and you have to allow women to work. And, you know, that was never women's inroad into the workplace.
Yeah.
Let's see. We also have Point Curation gave us $2 Canadian and said money for badgers. And then Point Curation also gave us $10 Canadian and said towards the fundraiser. And I thank you very much for that. But I am going to ask everybody that wants to donate to the fundraiser, please go to feedthebadger.com and do not do it through YouTube, because it's harder for us to track it as part of the fundraiser donations if you go through YouTube, even if you give us a super chat. And then it's also, YouTube takes a bigger cut than the system that we're
30%,
using.
right?
Yeah, so we actually get more of your donation if you go to Feed the Badger than we do if you do it through super chat. Let's see. Eddie's 1247 gave us $2 and said, my mom, kids, wife, and friends tell me, or feel my momentum. Feel my momentum?
Okay, I don't really know what that means, but
I'm a little lost there. You might clarify.
No.
And French Honey Badger gave us $5 and said, your intro would probably make a good article for Mrs.org. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And I guess I should finish that up with know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I might submit that. I have the article. I mean, I've got the, not article, but transcript. I mean, it's published on our Patreon. Yeah. So, but let's see. Going back to this talking point that they gave us. So their first thing was gendering this. But then before they gendered it, they said, we believe in an economy powered by transparency, accountability, security, and equity. So let's look at that transparency a minute. What's the first thing that you get when you start talking to somebody about the wage gap myth? And you start,
it's always the women making less, and women are forced into these gendered jobs, and if only we had more female leaders in STEM, then maybe little girls would be inspired to go into STEM fields. Oh, poor women.
Right, and it starts with, they claim that it's for the same job, right?
Yeah.
And here we have, like, okay, so they're saying it's for the same job. But then, if you look at the CONSAD report, you look at the alleged gap itself, and you look at the research on which the alleged gap is based, it's not for the same job. It's not for the same work. It's the wage gap that they cite, which I think is like, what, 21% or something like that?
It's always changing.
Yeah, and it's a comparison of the average of all women versus the average of all men working. And they don't differentiate in terms of full-time or part-time. They don't differentiate in terms of what types of jobs they do. They're basically comparing cashiers to construction workers to nurses and doctors to school teachers to whatever work there is that's being done.
Yeah.
And what do you get, though, when you point that out? When you point out that it's not for the same work, what do you get called?
Misogynist!
Yes. Our knees, they are so soggy. Why? Because we're not allowed to demand transparency in that discussion.
No, apparently not, as much as they like to claim it. But you go to the lists of the highest paid jobs, and then you look at the primary amount of men in that jobs versus women, and then there you have your answer, and it would be so easy if we could just accept that, but no, it can never really be that easy, can it?
Nope. How dare we examine the facts? How dare we examine the details? How dare we consider the possibility that there might be things that can be done to increase women's income that do not involve government mandates on employers? Oh my God, the horror.
Or maybe that for a lot of women, having that higher to, like, in order to go into one of those high paying jobs, it's not worth it for a lot of women. Like, I could have tried to go into dentistry or something like that, but that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that psychology wasn't exactly the world's best paying field, but it was something that I really wanted to do. And to me, that was more important. Yeah. And to a lot of women, that's just more important. And they act as though we're forced into making these decisions, but really we're not.
Yeah, and the truth is, not only are we not forced into making these decisions, but the fact that we are not forced the way, even on the level that men are, because men do face a degree of accountability that women don't in terms of career paths. Yeah. And like, you look at my example, I spent a good decade just being a dipshit in terms of responsibility for myself, and I'm not gonna pull any punches there. It was completely an irresponsible person in my early 20s and so on. And my grandfather desperately wanted me to be a lawyer, and he was probably right. I probably should have gone to law school. I wasn't accountable enough to succeed at law school at that time. But if I had been, and I had applied myself to the best of my ability, I might be a kick-ass lawyer right now.
Yeah, then you could talk about, then you could talk against Chu right away.
I think we've got the best representation we could possibly have. But the fact is, I earn more than minimum wage, but I don't earn what a lawyer earns. And what I do is very worthwhile, and I'm very glad to be doing it. And I'm very proud of the people I work with and what my organization is doing. And that's both of the organizations I work for. So I'm not unhappy that I didn't end up becoming a lawyer. But if we're just talking in terms of the wage gap myth, my experience of this alleged wage gap is my own fault entirely. And if my goal was only about money, well, then I screwed myself over, and that's just the way it is. I'm not going to pull any punches on that either. And I am privileged to have the condition of not being judged for choosing to take a job that by itself would not support my family if my spouse was not working. Men do get judged for that. There's your accountability.
Yeah, for sure. And like we had already mentioned earlier about how if women stay at home and look after the kids, then, wherever feminists aren't calling that male oppression of female agency or whatever, it's considered relatively normal outside of that. But if a man chooses to stay at home, then he's called all kinds of nasty names for that. He's called a deadbeat father. There's this kind of expectation that men are always the ones who are supposed to be supporting their wives and children. Whereas if they're staying at home, even if the wife is making more than enough money to support them, even if it's far better that the children have their father looking after them than being in a daycare, it doesn't matter. There's still that stigma against him.
Yeah. And not only does he face that stigma, he faces, under some circumstances, he faces legal action. If his wife doesn't want to be part of the family's breadwinning, if his wife doesn't want to have to help support the family, there's the potential for divorce if a guy doesn't earn enough money. The other thing is, if divorce happens and he doesn't earn enough money, then he can face a judge ordering him to earn more money. You know, and my husband went through that. He was ordered to earn more money. He was given an order based on imputed income and told that if he couldn't keep up with the payments based on that he would be imprisoned, or he would lose his driver's license, or a number of other stupid ways that they address child support that actually hinder people's ability to work.
Yeah, because that'll really get more money into those children's hands if he goes to prison.
Yep.
Good job, legal system. You make so much sense.
Oh, and take his driver's license so he can't actually get to his job, because that always helps. But yeah, and so we have this statement on transparency, accountability, security, and equity. Men don't have security on the job. Men don't have this idea that their job is always going to be there. They are accountable to their employer. They want to make sure. This is something that I don't think a lot of people realize this, especially like where I worked in retail. You get a lot of employees that treat their employer as an evil overlord. And the reality is the health of the business that you work for, the financial solvency of the business that you work for, the success of the business that you work for is your job security.
Yeah.
And
but like you mentioned security, like for crying out loud, men don't even have security for a decent meal if they get out of work. Like where I work right now, if a homeless woman and her children call in, I can pretty much guarantee finding them a decent meal. If a homeless man calls in looking for food, saying, I can't find food anywhere because they're all targeted towards women and families, what are we going to do for him? There's not much that we can do. A man doesn't even have security towards a guaranteed meal compared to women and children. Like, talking about equity, let's focus on that inequity.
Yeah, that is a huge inequality right there. And that's another thing. I never have had trouble obtaining a job. And part of the reason is employers are incentivized to hire me because I'm female. And I don't generally come with the potential baggage of having to owe a child support debt. Employers are not incentivized to hire men. Even when they owe child support, employers are not really incentivized to hire them. And having a garnishment means that the employer's accounting department or accountant, or the employer himself, if it's a very small business, has to deal with that every time they issue a paycheck for that employee. And that's pain, you know. So once again, you know, this idea of equity and security, it's not a gendered issue in the way that feminists think it is.
Yeah, no. And it's just so short-sighted and so unempathetic to see it that way. Like they have no empathy towards men, and it just boggles my mind. I don't know how more people don't see it.
Yeah, I wonder what they think, really what they think an economy powered by transparency would look like. I suspect they want people to not have the right to privacy when it comes to their pay rates. They want everybody to be able to find out what everybody else is paid, including. And there's been a push for among feminists for the Pay Equality Act. I can't remember what it's called, but they want to have the government tell employers what to pay various positions in the workplace. So if a government entity or a jury or whoever is going to be in charge of the decision making on this decides that the cashier and some other non-cashier job, maybe a shift manager, maybe a somebody that works with sharp stuff in the deli department, that their jobs are equitable, that their jobs are similar enough and the amount of work is similar enough that they should be paid the same. They want the government to tell the employer that they have to pay those two jobs the same. And like the first thing I can see that's wrong with that is, what if plenty of people are willing to work as a cashier because the particulars of working as a cashier are not necessarily as dangerous in something like maybe a grocery store. And maybe not everybody wants to work in a deli because some people might be afraid to handle the meat and cheese cutters. And, you know, to get people to work with the meat and cheese cutters, maybe they have to pay an extra dime an hour. And maybe it's not that much, you know, maybe maybe it's just that little amount. Maybe it's an extra quarter an hour. Maybe it's an extra $1 an hour. But if your government's telling you you can't do that, then the answer is you end up with a fully staffed set of cashiers, but you have difficulty getting people to work in the deli because now you can't pay them, you can't incentivize taking that job. And what do you end up with? You end up with employers that hire you in as a cashier and then transfer you to the deli, and after you get to where you depend on that job. Yeah,
exactly. And it's just such a silly thing, because we're going to get down to the nitty gritty of comparing these jobs, and it's like, oh, is this close enough? Is this minuscule task close enough to this other minuscule task that this other person is doing? Should they be getting paid the same amount, or does this one little thing necessitate a little bit extra? It's just so silly focusing on these teeny tiny little details. It just kind of misses the forest for the trees.
Yeah, oh, it does. And what it's going to end up doing is it's going to force employees to document even more than they already do. And, you know, you look at retail, that's one area. You look at upper sales. You look at sales where it's not necessarily retail, but direct sales. Say you got, Bob and Julie work in the same department. And it's the same sales of the same product or service. And they work the same hours, they work on the same days, they have the same amount of overtime or lack of overtime. There's none of those details are different. But based on his methods and his rapport with the consumers, Bob he brings in for the company, $30,000 a month. But Julie somehow clicks better with her customers, and she brings in for the company $40,000 or $50,000.
Right.
And maybe the company might incentivize Julie more. Maybe the company might reward Julie with merit pay. But if it was the other way around and it was Bob making more, they'd call it sexism if they do that. And employers aren't going to be able to do that kind of merit pay. They aren't going to be able to incentivize working to improve your value to the employer if they can't document how you achieve that. And yeah, Frank Bullitt has a point there too. Julie doesn't click better with the customers. People are thirsty and prefer to deal with women. I've run into that. And I've exploited it in the past when I worked in retail. I had consumers when I worked in the camera store that if I wore a clingy skirt to work and I showed them products that were, down on the floor, so I had to bend over and pick them up to show them off and anything. There were men that would buy things they didn't come in there for just because they wanted me to demonstrate them. But I did work on commission for some products, so take that how you will. I had a guy who, after the first time he came in, his wife wouldn't let him go into the store without her afterwards. But yeah, this situation where they're basically forcing employers to spend money documenting and to reduce the amount of incentive they offer employees to do a good job, where they reduce the amount. Yeah.
And then where's the incentive to do the better job then? Like if everybody's just going to get paid the same, then why is Bob going to care very much to try and sell more things? He's just going to, do the bare minimum to get through the day because it doesn't matter because
yeah,
it's all about the money. But what? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. This is what we've seen in socialist environments as well. Yeah. Just saying.
But you know what else really gets me about all this is why do these people care so much about what other people earn? Like, why does what Joseph makes at his job make any here or there to Josie if they're not related or in some way, you know? Like, it doesn't matter. Why does Joseph making $60,000 a year for doing a slightly better job, or having been there for longer, or having better credentials, or having longer work experience make any difference to Josie's experience or what Josie is making? It doesn't matter. When did that become Josie's business?
When women became like middle-class women and upper-class women that didn't necessarily have to work, became more prominent in the or prevalent in the workplace, I should say, not necessarily prominent. Yeah. And men do compete for wages. Men compete for success, you know, and that competition is the difference between men and women in the workplace. Is you have men who will strive to do better because the other guy has had more success. Women engage in relational aggression instead. So if the other guy or the other woman has had more success, the answer is for a lot of women not to strive to do better, but to grab them by the trousers and yank them back down to her level.
Crabs in a bucket.
Yeah, which is really bad for your employer. But once again, we're in a situation where the workers don't recognize the importance of the financial solvency and success of their employer to their job security. But going on with that workers' rights statement, the next thing that really stuck in my craw, they didn't say all people should be paid equitably, right? They didn't say all workers should be paid equitably. They said all women. All women. Yeah. So if there's pay inequality that affects men, that men are paid less in a particular environment, doesn't bother them. It's only a problem if it's women.
Yeah, they don't give a good goddamn if Joseph, who's making $60,000 a year, is making than Janet, who's doing a similar job but has more work experience and more educational credentials and is making $70,000 for a comparable job. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. All they care about is Josie making $50,000 and how that's terrible and how she should be making as much, if not more, than Joseph.
Exactly. And in that situation, honestly, once again, you know, the pay inequality, if it's discriminatory, yeah, you have the right to speak up and say something about that. You have the right to fight for better pay. Sometimes the best way to do that, and I've done this in the past, is to get a different job. You know, I've had shit jobs, and I've had situations of discrimination on the job, not for my sex, but for other reasons. I've been discriminated against twice for being accountable for circumstances, for basically dealing with circumstances that I ran across. Once for essentially taking accountability for the fact that my employer was doing illegal things, and I went through channels at my job and could not get anything done about it. And this was illegal things that were affecting the health of the people at the nursing home that I worked at. So it wasn't like anything that you could even remotely say was a victimless crime. There were people who were not being provided the care that they were paying for, and as a result, they were suffering. So I ended up going to the state. Well, when I went to the state, that led to me starting to get written up for things that never happened. Yeah, or pulled away from tasks I was in the middle of, and then written up for not finishing them. You know the drill. But I was earning $4.50 an hour. Minimum wage at that time was $4.25. So I'm earning $4.50 an hour. I'm earning 25 cents more than minimum wage. Am I going to fight for that job? Hell no. I just went somewhere else.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
And the same thing when I worked at the gas station. I was a witness in the 7 years in hell case when I was at that gas station. And I went through 6 managers at that gas station. And the last one I worked for was a fundraiser for the women's organization that was helping the vexatious litigant in the 7 years in hell case. And
oh, jeez.
She interfered, or attempted to interfere, in my ability to be there for the defendant in that case. And, you know, threatened, and then carried out the threat to affect my advancement on that job because of what I was doing. So, you know, same thing. I left that job for another job. It was not I was not making a lot more than minimum wage there either. So
yeah, it
wasn't. I'm going to sue somebody over that.
Yeah, exactly.
Just move on.
Not worth the hassle.
No.
Yeah, it's just there are so many things about the whole thing that they're just not looking at it in a lot of depth. They're saying this guy is getting $1 and this woman is getting 78 cents, and they're not looking any deeper than that, even though, as we have discussed for the past hour, there is so much more to be concerned about with that. But they don't care. All they care about is this guy with the dick is making more than this person with the vag, and that's the problem. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we go through with the rest of this, we look at this, when they talk about access to affordable health care, sick day, or child care, health care, sick days, paid family leave, and all that, those things, those were not much of a part of the workplace at all until we started seeing women. Men didn't get those things, you know, years ago.
Yeah.
You might have had something along those lines if you owned your own business. You know, if you ran a family business, maybe not health care, certainly not paid family leave, but you would determine your own work environment. And, well, back in the days of mostly family businesses, you had your kids working with you and learning your trade. So, you know, there was your child care.
One of my dad's 2 jobs did have childcare available, so that was a nice thing. But the other one, like, he would have to go to work at like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and then he would have to take me along and have me sleep on the couch in his office because we couldn't afford childcare. Like, that would have been really nice if we had paid childcare. Like, it certainly would have been helpful, and not just because he wasn't a woman. Like, he wasn't my mom. I'm sure my dad would have loved to have had that extra security so that he didn't have to worry about carting a 2-year-old girl around.
Yeah, it would have been nice, but it's one of those things that just because something would be nice doesn't mean your employer's responsible for it, does it?
Yeah.
And that's something that, like, those ideas come along. Now, you had upper class women entering the workplace after the workplace was made safer, after, you know, the Workplace Safety Act was passed. You had, you know, women were more likely to take some of these jobs once there were safety standards, once there were circumstances where they were working less hours. They weren't working 16-hour days. They were working 8 or 10-hour days. You know, this is basically a situation where they didn't evolve with the workplace. So you had the poor women who worked in textile mills and coal mines and shit like that would recognize the fact that when you start making these demands of your employer, what you do is you affect how much your employer is going to budget for individual employees. And if they have to budget more for each employee, they can't budget for as many employees. Or they may not budget for as many work hours. And it doesn't change, it doesn't necessarily change the employee's situation for the better if the employee's job gets eliminated so that the employer can pay somebody else more money or provide health care, child care, increase their sick days, and so on.
But, you know, like, even if they want to go in that direction, then they still shouldn't say that it's a woman's issue, because these things would clearly help a lot of men just as much.
It would affect men as well.
Yep.
And, that's with the Family and Medical Leave Act that was passed here in the United States. We have you can get maternity leave or paternity leave approved under FMLA. It's not paid, but it is. Your employer can't tell you you can't take that leave. You can get leave to take care of a family member. It's not paid, again, but your employer can't tell you you can't take that leave. If you have sick days, you can use them. If you're smart and you plan for your childbearing instead of just doing it by chance, you can save up for so many days off for your sick leave. There's a lot of things that people can do, especially at the higher end of work environments, that there's not necessarily a reason why all employers should have to pay for these things. But women can be very short-sighted about stuff like this. And a lot of it is because, once again, a lot of the upper-class women didn't evolve up in the workplace. Their family history of women working didn't evolve along the lines of workplaces that would be bankrupted by stuff like this.
Yeah. And I mean, like, of course, there is that whole aspect that you just brought up, like the whole childcare thing. Like, a lot of people say, oh, if only men would step up and take off time to care for the kids so that the mother could work instead, maybe then she wouldn't have to put off her career. But it's not always quite that simple, though, because I mean, a lot of times women are recovering physically, especially if they had to do like a C-section or something like that. Women are able to breastfeed, so it's a lot easier for them to stay at home and be able to care for the children that way. Like, there are physical reasons why it's more likely a lot of the time that women will be likely to stay at home, not to mention like the concoction of hormones that mothers often get when giving birth, that sometimes fathers just don't form that attachment for many months. And I mean, even sometimes mothers don't, but it's more common that mothers will form that attachment early on. And there's just a lot of reasons. And when women stay at home to take care of the children, they wind up losing a lot of time that, I mean, I guess their husbands, the male counterpart, just wouldn't wind up losing in that case.
Yeah.
And so then they fall behind, and that costs them work experience. And I mean, sure, if the man was the one to stay and take care of the children, because sometimes that happens, and that's fine if that's the way they want to do those things. But then nobody should be surprised if he winds up taking a cut in experience and he doesn't get the raise before the other guy that stayed at the job the whole time would have gotten, right? Like, there are, again, many more reasons, and it's just all being looked over.
Yeah, and that's, like, this is the fact that, this goes back to that transparency issue, the fact that these details exist. Like, we discuss these details, we get called misogynists for discussing these details. Male supremacists, actually. We get called male supremacists for pointing out that, of all things, when you make a choice, that choice may have naturally occurring results. And if it has naturally occurring results, those naturally occurring results do not make you a victim of discrimination by somebody.
Well, and plus, like, I literally just said, if a man does the same thing, if he decides to be the one to stay at home, then he will likely take not advance as fast in his career as the guy that didn't take that time off. Yep. It's not about men or women being better. It's about men more often making different choices, women more often making different choices, and that's okay. It's not some patriarchal conspiracy theory.
Yep. So what we have here in this argument, essentially, is feminists arguing that women's employers are uniquely responsible for the natural results of a woman's life choices, including family planning, division of responsibilities in their homes, pursuit of career path, and personal expenses. And that's like men are not expected to get the same benefit. They don't expect men to have the same, results. And they don't expect employers to give men necessarily the same concessions. This is supposed to be uniquely for women. And what's that going to do as far as making women an attractive prospect for hiring?
It's not.
Yeah, like you think about this. I got candidate A and candidate B for this job, and this job is one of those jobs that I'm going to need the employee to create a financial value for the company. Maybe they're going to help me in the process of manufacturing something. Maybe they're going to market something. Maybe they're going to directly sell something. Maybe they're going to build something or tear something down, whatever. But they're bringing in money as an employee, and maybe they're providing a service. And I've got one employee that is going to provide me a consistent long-term return on my investment by consistently being there, by having a degree of dedication to the workplace, to the career, and by advancing consistently due to the consistent presence. And then I have another employee that after a couple of years is going to take several months off due to childbearing or due to other family choices. And then after that, maybe due to a life circumstance change, they're going to want to work less hours. They're going to want to work less weekends. They're not going to want to work late hours. They might not want to come in too early in the morning. They're going to want to take time off more frequently, and so on.
And then when you take them into your office to, say, hey, this is kind of a problem, they're going to get angry, and then they're going to hashtag me to you as well.
Yeah. And so you have that risk. You can't have a conference with this employee by yourself. You have to worry that this employee might sue you if they take offense at something one of your other employees said. And now the federal government says you have to pay the same to both employees, even though one of them's going to give you a consistent return on your investment and the other one is not. And why would you hire the one that's not going to give you a consistent return on the investment? And there are things that employers choose women for because there are times where a woman actually does provide a value that a man doesn't. Like the situation where maybe in a customer service setting or a sales setting, the woman, like I said, clicks with the customers a little better, or maybe she's better at schmoozing, maybe she's got a nicer ass than he does. It doesn't matter. And there are times when women are hired not because they're going to provide a consistent return through their work hours and so on, but for other reasons. But if the employer can't count on her, and if being unable to count on her doesn't mean that she takes a pay cut, then that's going to end up outweighing that other incentive. So this idea, what these feminists are fighting for, might actually end up costing women jobs. The next thing you'll see is them fighting for it being considered discrimination if an employer doesn't have the same number of men and women working in the workplace.
They'll pretty much have to.
Yeah. And the last bit of their talking point. This one is just, they basically declared illegal immigration a feminist issue here. The statement is targeted specifically towards undocumented workers, even though they mention other workers. All workers, including domestic and farm workers, undocumented and migrant workers, must have the right to organize, again, unionize, and fight for a living minimum wage. So what they are basically saying here is they demand that people who enter the country illegally, who are working illegally, who are being employed illegally by employers who are not supposed to hire them, should have the same government-backed power that union workers have against the employer.
Well, I mean, like, these are the same types of people who tend to argue that, oh, if we just had open borders, we would be so much richer. Look at all of these facts that say that open borders would make the world richer.
It's working out great in Europe, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, now, for me, the undocumented workers issue, like, they're sort of running it over here. And I honestly, I get real pissed off about this issue, and part of it is because undocumented workers get hired at a lower rate, and I see them as being exploited. But they're here illegally, and that is a crime, and we do not have a chance to vet people who enter the country illegally, and there is an unfortunately high incidence of people ending up in gangs, people ending up in very destitute living situations, people being trafficked, and so on because of this. And to slap this on it, this doesn't solve any of those problems. This basically creates something to hide those problems behind. And it's really not as pro-undocumented worker as it sounds. And yeah, I will agree with the person in chat who said that this is a criminal act. Being an undocumented worker in this country is a criminal act. So yes, they are criminals. And so are prostitutes, and there are some situations where prostitutes are criminals and victims at the same time. Yeah. And the same is true of undocumented workers. There are situations where undocumented workers are criminals and victims at the same time. And this will solve neither of those problems, but exacerbate both. And it's not a gender issue in the way that feminists say, because there are a significant number, a very significant number of undocumented workers who are men who are forced into extremely shitty living conditions, doing dirty and dangerous jobs for almost nothing.
Yep.
So that's our workers' rights talking point analysis. I'm going to go through the rest of the super chats. Let's see, we stopped at
the mom kid's wife, I think.
Yep, mom kid's wife. Feel my momentum. Okay, now I bet it's fuel. I
bet
yeah, maybe. Left out. Now that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah,
that's actually. I'm betting that's it, simply because that is characteristic of all of the men I know. Field of Bears gave us $5 and said, law is such a convoluted mess that people need lots of money to be willing to deal with it. Also, socialism always ends in starvation and genocide. We have to say that every show, guys. Socialism always ends in starvation and genocide. And unfortunately, that's only half true. So, socialism always results in starvation and genocide. But even after starvation and genocide, it unfortunately doesn't always seem to end.
Yeah, just kind of keeps going.
Yeah. Pony Toms gave us $2 and says, men are bad for overworking and not working. Yeah.
Yep. Men can't do anything right.
Ultimate catch-22. Damned if you don't, damned if you do. It's about time to say, damned if I give a give a care. But yeah. Oh gosh, I am not going to try to imitate the gravelly Afrikaner accent, I don't think. Chris Stewart gave us $5. It says, in gravelly Afrikaner accent, what do you know about Wakandan privilege?
Wakandan privilege.
Wakandan privilege.
Yeah, was that racist? I don't even know.
Well, I don't think it is. But are we not allowed to acknowledge that everybody has accents? Because I can quote Jeff Foxworthy on that.
People were saying Ugandan Knuckles is racist.
Oh yeah, that whole God. That's so stupid.
It was.
A character created by people from the area that the character was supposed to be from is racist because he sounds like the people from that area, having been played by somebody from that area. Terribly racist. People sound like themselves. How dare we do that?
Oh no.
No, Foxworthy, he pointed out, like in the United States, we have a million accents, right? And
Right.
Ohio is no exception. We have a Northern Ohio accent, which I am exhibiting right now, and then we have a Southern Ohio accent. And that's my situation. I grew up in Ohio. I did not grow up in Ohio, but I live in Ohio. So, for those who are Foxworthy fans, Jeff Foxworthy fans, now you know my life story. I grew up in Ohio, and then I moved to Ohio, and that's where I am today. Chris Stewart gave us $10 and says, more seriously, this whole conversation makes me shake my head when tradcons and alt-righters unironically parrot feminist propaganda about women in the workplace, saying we should remove them. And he gave us $10 more and continued, as if there was ever a time that women weren't in the workplace, that the mythical patriarchy ever actually existed, and that they want it back. It never existed, and they are spreading feminist myths.
Yeah.
And that's true. Although I will say, Mallory Reed grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. There we go. Yes, I'm a little north of Cincinnati. But now, were you in Ohio, Mallory, when Big Butter Jesus got struck by lightning? Or were you in Ohio, I should say, still, when Big Butter Jesus got struck by lightning? In any case, yeah, no, one thing that tradcons have right is that women of means who did not have to seek work, entering entering the workplace en masse and maintaining job status en masse altered the economy in such a way that now, in order to maintain a middle-class household, both parents have to work. In most cases, both parents have to work. A guy has to have a high income otherwise.
Yeah, if there's a surplus of labor, then that labor all of a sudden becomes worth half as much. That's all there is to it.
Well, and it is like middle class status changed. What was middle class versus what is middle class changed as well. And that's something that I guess you could sort of identify it in terms of everybody has to have a car, everybody has to have a television, everybody has to have a microwave. You can't just have your oven. Everybody has to have a lot of conveniences, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that we have a more consumer-oriented economy, but they are correct in noting that women who were not working because they needed the money did permanently alter the American economy. Whether they are right about it being a bad thing is debatable. And no, patriarchy was not the problem there. Women had the privilege of saying, I don't want to work outside the home. I'm going to make the home my domain. And they used it. They took that privilege. And you also had the situation where there were restrictions on women because men were expected to support them. A husband who didn't support his wife to the best of his ability was actually guilty of neglect, just the same way as a parent that doesn't take care of their child to the best of their ability is guilty of neglect. Women were in a position financially and socially and legally between children and adults. And that status gave them a combination of privileges and restrictions. And they fought really, really hard to get rid of those restrictions and maintain the privileges. And that's part of the problem today. But at the outset, that still is not the patriarchy causing the problem. That is women essentially trading freedom for security. French Honey Badger gave us $2 and says, "Do you know the way?" Oh, and I'm lost. Oh, no. Chris Stewart gave us $2 and says, opinion on men getting paternity pay and paternity leave. As far as mandated leave, I will say my primary opinion is it's not the government's place to tell the employer what the employer should be doing, and interfering in the employer-employee relationship like that is not the best thing for either the employee or the employer. It is a good thing if the government says, if you're going to offer this, you can't discriminate against the employee based on their sex, their race, their religion, their all that. But it's not a good thing for the government to come along and say, every employer out there has to make available to every employee in their employ this type of leave. Because there are certain circumstances where that is a much bigger burden on the employer. And then there are other circumstances where the employer might have done this organically. My employer that I have now is much nicer about days off and leave than my previous employers have been. And I'm aware very much of the effects of that and the reasons behind it. And so when I want time off, I still do the things I would have had to do for my previous employers to earn it, because I want to keep that workplace situation solvent and healthy. But they are able to do that because of the type of environment that we have. And if it was a different employer and the government came along and said, well, these guys do this and it worked, and it was an employer where they didn't have the staff or they didn't have the circumstances, and having employees take the amount of time off that I take off from work, and having them expect to be paid for it, or having them expect to not have to make up for that time by taking other shifts when other employees want time off, that could actually be very damaging to some employees. When I worked at the gas station, we had a staff of like 6 or 8 people, maybe 15 total actually, between all 3 shifts and weekdays and weekends and the management. But I mean, there were never more than 3 or 4 people in the store tops, and there were a lot of times when there was only one person in the store at a time. And we might have 3 night shifters cover the entire night shift schedule for a month. So if one of them all of a sudden decides they need 2 weeks off straight, or they want to go on maternity leave, or they want to go on some other family leave, you just lost 1/3 of your night shift. That's it's a much bigger deal in that environment than it is in an environment where you have a staff of dozens of people that can be interchanged between departments or sections of a larger workplace. So I'm all for employers exploring those options and doing what they can to incentivize their employees to provide them a great value. But when you have the government turning around and telling companies, you must do this way regardless, you end up creating problems instead of solving them.
Overall, I think that it's good to have that kind of leave equally for men and women. And I know that this is going to be misconstrued the wrong way, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that if we don't start having at least a couple of more incentives to start for people to have children, I think it's becoming more and more difficult for people to afford children, first of all, and becoming more and more infrequent that people even want children to begin with. And I think that unless we start providing more incentives, then more and more people are just going to not have children. And I know that a lot of people say, oh, that's good, we're overpopulated, but actually the world population is only going to continue to grow so much more. They think it's probably going to reach a leveling off point. And another point in that is that our economy is probably going to have a suffering eventually, like Japan is suffering because there's not enough people to replace the rapidly aging population, and then we're just going to have to keep importing people from other countries. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best choice, but that's just my view on it. I don't necessarily think that that this is something that we should mandate now, every job must have, but I do think that it can be a good idea for some reasons.
And I think a lot of this stuff happens organically. I mean, you get a situation where you have a good job market, a really robust, healthy job market, and in potential employees, job seekers can actually shop around and in a lot of cases take their pick of what job they want. Employers are going to be more likely to offer better incentives, especially, like my employer, as one of the reasons that they do what they do is because it's hard to get people to do a job like I do. I'm a direct caregiver for intellectually disabled adults. It's hard to get people to do the job because people are intimidated. They're afraid they're not going to be able to do it right. And then it's also hard to get people to take a job like this without paying them more than you can pay for a job like this, because there's not enough, there's no profit in it, and there's not enough of a, like, this is a disability thing, so there's not enough of a funding for it, even with charitable giving and everything, to enable an employer to just pay a lot of money for that. So this kind of thing, it's important, and it is an important conversation to have, and it is one of those things that, employees really ought to let employers know, hey, if you're trying to incentivize us to look at your company as a place where we want to work, that's one of the things that you should offer us. And if employers are able to do that, you can bet they'll consider it. So that's capitalism. That's how it works.
Yeah, of course. So, but bottom line, if that sort of thing is going to be offered, it must be offered to both people. Because to give women all of the privileges and to say men, no, you don't get any of the benefits, then that's just not cool.
Right. And what you'll find is you won't necessarily see every guy out there taking a bunch of time off, because they still want to have that advancement. You'll see guys that need to using it. But going on to the next one, let's see. There's
one more.
We did pay paternity leave. Oh. And Chris is a sweetheart. Chris Stewart gave us $2 and says, Hannah is best girl. Prim is a close second, though. I think Prim is cuter, though.
Oh, and that's why Hannah makes a wage from this and I don't. And that's an awful wage gap. Yeah, I should totally rally for this. This is death rights.
Yeah, I make a wage for this because I do the opening video and everything.
I'm just teasing. Yeah. I would feel bad even. I just do this because I like to do this.
Yeah, well, and I did that for 3 years.
It's important. It's important to talk about these things.
It is. French Honey Badger gave us $5 and says, you won't incentivize people to have children and take care of them while the state sells future children for current consumption. That's another thing. What she was talking about, what Prim was talking about with reduction in new children and everything, the reduction in new births, there are problems with that people don't think about. For instance, when the Social Security system, which is a giant pyramid scam, began, it did not take several workers' wages to create enough of a buildup of funds to support one retiree. When I think I was in high school when it reached, maybe I was in college when it reached 16 workers to one retiree. And then by now it's probably more like double that or triple that. And that will continue. And for a number of reasons. We have inflation. We have the money is getting used faster than it's getting put in. It is a giant pyramid scam. And we have people living longer. We have healthcare expenses increasing because we are capable of doing more things in terms of healthcare. So we have all these things that are a drain on that system, and it's being mismanaged by our government, and they've had ample chance to reform how they handle it, and rather than reforming how they handled it, they fight over it consistently and constantly and accuse each other of malfeasance and malevolence over it. And so that's one problem. Another one is Once you hit a certain age, your body starts to deteriorate. And we haven't hit a place in medical advancement where we can stop that from happening. We may never. I don't know. But at this point, we haven't. And so there hits a point, if you live long enough and you don't die of a heart attack or a stroke or get killed in an accident or from an illness, where you can't take care of yourself and you're still alive. And you have to have people who are willing to do the job of taking care of the elderly, who don't have their own children and don't live with their families. You aren't going to have that with fewer and fewer children being born. Not everybody wants to be a nurse's aide in a nursing home. Not everybody wants to be a nurse in a nursing home. And not everybody is able to keep their mom and dad in their home after they get old. And so what happens is, like right now, at least state law in Ohio, I don't know if it's federal or not, but at least state law in Ohio, if you run a nursing home and you have your residents, you are required to have enough nurses' aides so that nobody has more than 14 residents to take care of at any given time, and they have a limited number of those residents that can be immobile, and that have to depend on them for movement, and that are completely senile or suffer from something like Alzheimer's or a lack of communication, such as after a stroke. Eventually, there will get to the point where you cannot staff these places to those standards. And what are we going to do then? Are we going to warehouse old people and treat them like objects? Or are we going to go the way that, I believe it's Holland that is starting to euthanize them? So you get to a certain age and you get a shot. And you don't wake up.
Well, you know what this means. This means we have to lobby for women's aging rights. That's what this means.
Yeah, and here they are, this is the short-sightedness of feminism, right? Abortion is a women's issue, right? And what does abortion do? It takes out a huge number of those future workers, those future civilians that might provide care for their parents in their old age, or who might go to work in nursing homes, who might go into the healthcare industry for other reasons. Maybe the person who might discover how to slow the deterioration, the bodily deterioration process. So now there's that number of children not being born. And who lives longer out of men or women because of, among other things, the workplace death gap, and of course the stress gap? That would be women. So more likely than not, if we end up in a situation where where we go into a euthanasia society, it's going to be women that are going to be getting euthanized more often than men. And of course, women who remain childless all their life, and women who abort and then never have a baby, that don't have children to take care of them, that end up alone in their old age, and they ended up making themselves targets. And it's not something that anybody should gloat over. It's not a gotcha moment or anything like that. It's just an example of extreme short-sightedness.
Yep, as usual.
And yeah, Verticine has a very valid point here, because women work less and die older. Mm-hmm. And that's it. So let's see, we have
one more.
Some dumb jerk gave us $5. Oh, that's an awesome name. Gave us $5 and says, "Hi Badgers, my other half doesn't like when I listen to you. Here's $5. You won't get in the divorce. Don't divorce your other half." And hopefully she doesn't divorce you. Clean your room, work at your relationship. But thank you very much for the $5. And tell your other half she should listen to us too. 'Cause we're not down on women.
Expand your mind, hear other viewpoints.
Yes. We want to see women get to the position where men are, where women have the success that men have because women are able to do the things that men do. And only if women reach the level of accountability that men face will women ever do that. That's certainly not misogynistic. That is not what feminism is, but what feminists often claim feminism really is about. We're not feminists, and we're still better feminists than feminists.
Yeah.
And with that, I would like to thank everybody for listening. I would like to remind everybody one more time, because our court case is so important to us, and I believe it's very important to the listeners. Please visit Feed the Badger to donate or to share the Feed the Badger page for our fundraiser, so that other people will see it, so other potential donors will see it. We really, really want to win this, and we really want to get everybody there. So once again, that's my little shill, my second shill for Feed the Badger. And again, with that, thanks to all the cool kids listening tonight. Thanks to Prim for being my co-host.
Of course.
And for consistently being my co-host. And thanks to everyone who helps make Honey Badger live streams happen. Andrew, I want to thank you for helping me keep track of the super chats. That is a godsend. And thank you all, our listeners, and good night.